They erased his name from every record, burned every photo, and swore never to speak of him again. So why did his son just show up at their gates with DNA proof and a letter that says you buried a hero? This isn't just a family scandal. This is a chilling case of legacy, race, and generational betrayal wrapped inside a Southern dynasty's darkest secret. Welcome to the untold story of Elias Montcairn, a war hero whose existence was deliberately deleted until now. If you think family drama can't get darker than inheritance feuds, think again. This is ancestral erasure meets historical justice. Hidden letters, burnt portraits, and a bloodline scandal so twisted, it's giving Knives Out meets real life. What happens when the past knocks on your front door and it looks exactly like the man you tried to forget? Keep watching, because this is where truth goes viral. He arrived just after sunset, tall, silent, and holding a single weathered envelope with the Montcairn family crest. No one recognized him, but the moment he spoke, the air shifted. "My name is Aurelian," he said, "and I believe I belong here." The guards hesitated, not because of his voice, but because of his face. It was hauntingly familiar. Whispers spread through the estate like wildfire. Who was he? An imposter? A con man? Or something far more dangerous? The timing was no accident. That very night marked the 100th anniversary of the Montcairn Legacy Gala. He wasn't just crashing a party, he was crashing a century of silence. And tucked in his coat was a folder labeled Classified Elias Montcairn. What they didn't know was that history had just come back and it wanted answers. What happened next would force them to look into a mirror they'd spent generations avoiding, leading us straight into the first forbidden contact. You deleted him from the family tree, but I carry his blood, and tonight, I want the truth. That was the first thing Aurelian said as he stood outside the Montcairn estate gates, gripping a torn leather folder and staring into the camera at the guard post. He wasn't shouting. He didn't need to. His voice was steady, low, and sharp like a match about to be struck. The footage, later leaked online, exploded across TikTok and Reddit threads within hours under hashtags like Erased Legacy and Montcairn Scandal. Viewers were obsessed. Who was this man with a face that mirrored the family patriarch but a name no one had ever heard? The Montcairns were America's darlings, old money, Southern aristocracy, their estate the backdrop of political fundraisers, Forbes interviews, and magazine covers. But tonight, under a fading sky and the glow of antique lanterns, the fairy tale was cracking. Aurelian held up the folder again. Inside, faded birth certificates, a war medal, and a black and white photo of a man labeled Elias Montcairn deceased, 1945. Except, that man was never supposed to exist. And what no one at the gate realized was, this history wasn't just knocking, it was breaking the damn door down. If this man never existed, then why is his name stamped by your family seal? Aurelian's voice sliced through the tension as he opened the weathered folder in front of the Montcairn staff. Inside, a birth certificate yellowed by time, but unmistakably authentic. The name printed in careful cursive read Elias Montcairn. No middle name, no footnotes. Just one line that shattered everything: son of Charles and Evelyn Montcairn. Gasps were heard behind velvet curtains. The Montcairns prided themselves on legacy portraits, plaques, libraries named after grandfathers and great-aunts. But Elias had never been mentioned. Not once. Not in any history books, family memoirs, or glossy documentaries aired on PBS. And yet here it was proof that someone had deliberately erased him. Why was it shame scandal? A crime buried beneath Bourbon's slick southern charm. Aurelian slowly laid down more documents, a military ID, a baptism record, even a letter addressed to my dearest son, Elias. Each page was a silent scream in paper form. The Montcairn name was supposed to be spotless, untouchable. But this folder, this forgotten dossier, was a time bomb laced with truth. And the detonator, it had just been triggered. You told the world he died a hero, but you buried the truth alive. Aurelian's voice trembled not from fear, but from the weight of a legacy built on lies. He held up the final page of the file, a DNA report. 99.98% matched to the Montcairn bloodline. Undeniable. Next came military records, decorated medals, commendations, a Purple Heart awarded posthumously. Posthumously, Elias Montcairn had not died in combat. He returned, broken, perhaps, changed, but alive, and yet his name vanished. His identity was scrubbed from the family tree like a blemish on a porcelain vase. Why? Because he didn't fit the Montcairn mythos. He refused the arranged marriage. He questioned the family's finances. He spoke truths meant to stay hidden. So they rewrote the narrative. Told neighbors and newspapers alike, Elias gave his life for the country. What they didn't say was that they gave up on him first. Behind the gilded portraits and curated genealogy charts was a single, unforgivable secret. They erased their own blood. And now that truth was clawing its way out, dragging the past behind it like a corpse demanding recognition. This wasn't just a family mystery, it was the beginning of a reckoning. And the door to it had just been forced open. If Elias never existed, then why is his name etched into this grave? Hidden behind the chapel. Part 2 begins not with answers, but with silence, the kind that thickens the air, that clings to old stones and rotting ledgers. Aurelian walks the estate grounds, past the manicured hedges and marble statues, until he finds it a weather-worn gravestone tucked behind ivy and thyme. Elias Montcairn, 1923. No date of death. No epitaph. Just a name the family swore never existed, now carved in stone. This wasn't just a secret. It was a cover-up meticulously curated to disappear. The butler, who once served Elias tea before deployments, pretends not to remember him. The library's war journals have missing pages. And inside the attic, a half-burnt photograph of Elias in uniform with someone beside him whose face has been violently scratched out. The estate wasn't a home. It was a crime scene layered in velvet and denial. And with each step, Aurelian wasn't just uncovering history, he was challenging a lie that had ruled for generations. But if the family buried Elias, what else did they bury with him? The answer would begin to surface in the next revelation, one far more dangerous than any name in stone. Why is there an empty frame in a room filled with legacies? That was the question Aurelian couldn't shake as he stood in the ancestral gallery of Montcairn Hall, facing the patriarch himself, Thaddeus Montcairn, a man carved out of tradition and stone. The room was a museum of power oil portraits, golden plaques, swords crossed above fireplaces, names etched into mahogany. And then, that frame, center wall, prime position, empty, deliberately empty. Thaddeus sat beneath it like a monument guarding a lie. He said nothing. He didn't need to. His silence was louder than thunder. Aurelian stepped closer. Is this where Elias was supposed to hang? The old man's eyes didn't flinch, but the butler tensed. In a family obsessed with legacy, omission spoke louder than presence. This wasn't just a forgotten name. It was an intentional erasure, a void preserved through generations, framed by denial. Viral history isn't built on facts, it's built on what gets removed. And here, in this curated cathedral of memory, one man's truth was exiled like a ghost. The frame wasn't just empty, it was a warning. Who decides which stories deserve to be remembered, and which must be erased? That question would unravel the Montcairn myth from the inside out. Thaddeus Montcairn finally spoke, but only behind closed doors. The air was thick, the silence between grandfather and grandson sharp enough to cut glass. Aurelian didn't waste time. He laid the faded documents on the mahogany desk with steady hands, his voice controlled but burning beneath the surface. You erased my father. Was it because of who he was, or who he loved? The question dropped like a blade. Thaddeus blinked once, slowly. His knuckles tightened on the armrest. The question wasn't just about Elias. It was about the Montcairn name, what it allowed, and what it would never forgive. The old man leaned forward. We protected this family, he said coldly. From scandal. From shame. From collapse. But what kind of legacy needs protection from the truth? Aurelian stared him down. His father had served, had bled, had disappeared. Not by accident. By design. The room pulsed with generational violence, not of fists, but of silence. This wasn't just a family dispute. This was a war between erasure and exposure. And Aurelian wasn't leaving without a crack in the walls. Because when silence is policy, speaking becomes rebellion. What Thaddeus said next would shatter the carefully preserved lie. And the real storm was just beginning. In the quiet corridors of Montcairn, where portraits whispered secrets and marble floors muffled footsteps, a single voice from the shadows cracked the silence wide open. An aging housekeeper, long retired yet still tethered to the estate by memory and guilt, pulled Aurelian aside. Her voice trembled, not from age, but from the weight of truth finally clawing its way to light. I saw it, she said, eyes glinting. A letter, written in your father's hand. Aurelian froze. She continued. It was love. A letter to a woman of color. Thaddeus found it. He threw it into the fireplace, but not all of it. She remembered how Thaddeus watched the flames eat the page, then suddenly yanked it out, leaving a half-burned corner behind. Just enough to bury, not enough to erase. The letter didn't just hold affection, it held defiance. In elegant script scorched by fire, Elias had written, "They may deny us a name, but never the truth of what we are." That single sentence, charred at the edge, survived in the woman's memory, and it changed everything. Because once love is committed to paper, even fire can't fully destroy it. And if that letter still existed somewhere, Montcairn's foundation was about to crack. What if the family secret wasn't just buried, but silenced on purpose? As Aurelian dug deeper into the ashes of Montcairn's past, something unsettling emerged. Records gone missing, portraits moved, dates rewritten. It was no longer about who Elias loved, but who wanted him forgotten. The question wasn't just about shame, it was about power. And what came next would unravel everything they thought was secure. The moment a local reporter caught wind of the confrontation at Montcairn's gates, the story ignited like dry brush in August heat. Lost Montcairn heir returns for justice. The headlines screamed, paired with a shadowed photo of Aurelian holding the tattered folder like a weapon. What started as whispers among town elders became a storm across radio stations, social feeds, and morning news segments. Comment sections exploded. Who was Elias Montcairn? Why was his name erased? The Montcairn estate, once a symbol of untouchable legacy, now sat under siege. Thaddeus refused interviews. The family's lawyers issued chilling statements about privacy violations and unsubstantiated claims. But Aurelian wasn't backing down. As microphones swarmed and drones hovered over iron gates, the truth clawed closer. This wasn't a scandal, it was a reckoning. And as pressure mounted, the estate began to fracture from the inside. Montcairn wasn't just hiding a secret, it was hiding a crime. And if the world kept watching, someone inside would eventually break. But what would it cost Aurelian to keep the spotlight burning? And how much danger was he truly in? Inside the once impenetrable walls of the Montcairn estate. Aurelian's presence spread like a slow-burning fire, silent, but inescapable. The family dinners became quieter, eye contact shorter. He could feel it the way uncles stiffened when he entered a room, How cousins whispered behind antique doors. How the matriarch refused to speak his name. "He's not one of us." Someone muttered loud enough for him to hear. They called him a liar, an opportunist, a disruption to a legacy built on order and perfection. But beneath the icy stares and forced smiles, something else cracked doubt. A younger cousin secretly handed Aurelian an old photo with the initials Emo, scribbled on the back. A distant aunt whispered, "Your grandfather cried the night your father left." The image of the Montcairns as flawless, unbroken, began to crumble. The deeper Aurelian dug, the more fault lines he uncovered, not just in their history, but in their hearts. And with each cold rejection, his resolve grew hotter. But in a family that buried truth to protect its name, getting too close to the past didn't just threaten reputation, it threatened lives. And someone was already watching. The truth didn't just knock, it exploded. Aurelian slid a USB drive across the Montcairn table. Click. Play. The voice was unmistakable, Elias Montcairn, in full uniform, laughing, speaking with a woman whose voice cracked with pride. "I'll see you at graduation." "Okay, I want you in the front row." Ruth. Ruth, Aurelian's mother. Then came the photos, undeniable, time-stamped, unaltered. A young black woman in a modest dress, standing next to Elias in his military cap, his hand protectively on her shoulder. Then the final blow, a classified discharge document marked confidential, revealing Elias was forced out under moral conduct violations, a cruel euphemism, hiding one thing he dared to love across color lines. The room went silent. Even the ones who denied Aurelian's claim stared at the screen as if it were a ghost. There was no more dodging, no more gaslighting. The perfect Montcairn history was a lie, edited like a movie reel, and Elias had been cut out of the script. Aurelian didn't need their acceptance anymore. He had something stronger, proof. But with proof comes danger. Because when reputation is the currency of power, exposing the truth means someone will try to silence it. Permanently. But just when the truth seemed undeniable, the real war began, because exposing a lie this old doesn't bring justice. It brings retaliation. The Montcairn estate locked down. Lawyers circled like vultures, and anonymous threats slipped beneath Aurelian's hotel door. This wasn't just a scandal, it was a legacy collapsing. But what Aurelian did next turned the fire into an inferno. The truth hit like a bombshell. Thaddeus Montcairn, the revered patriarch, the man who spoke at universities about heritage and honor, had once forced his own son Elias to abandon the woman he loved, because she was a black woman. Aurelian's mother. It wasn't a tragedy, it was a decision. Cold, calculated, hidden behind the silk curtains of Southern tradition and the polished marble of the Montcairn estate. Purity of bloodline. Thaddeus had once said, according to an old housekeeper who had heard the shouting through a cracked door. That night, Elias left and never returned, not because he wanted to, but because he was exiled, disowned not for dishonor, but for loving someone who didn't fit the family's curated image. This wasn't about shame, it was about power. And that kind of cruelty, once exposed, doesn't just stain a name. It burns it into history. And now, the fire had reached the gates of Montcairn. But what if there was still one secret left? One they had buried deeper than all the rest, Thaddeus's voice. Once thunderous with command, cracked under the weight of a truth too long buried. "Your father didn't die in war," he whispered, not looking Aurelian in the eyes. "He died because I forced him to choose family or love." The words hung in the air like smoke after a fire, suffocating, irreversible. In that moment, Montcairn's grand legacy collapsed into a pile of hollow marble and lies. Elias had not fallen on the battlefield. He had been crushed beneath the boot of legacy, silenced by the very man who called himself father. Thaddeus admitted he gave Elias an ultimatum, a bloodline soaked in rules, or a life with a woman deemed unworthy by aristocratic tradition. Elias chose love, and for that, he was erased. Not just from inheritance, but from memory. The family faked a military death, held a false funeral, and burned every trace of his existence. But ghosts don't stay buried forever. And now that the lie had been spoken aloud, one question remained: what would Aurelian do with the truth? The betrayal didn't come from enemies, it came from blood. Aurelian's own uncle, the man who now wore the family crest, who sat at the head of the Montcairn estate, had knowingly sealed Elias's fate. Years ago, fueled by envy and ambition, he falsified a military report, accusing Elias of insubordination. It was a lie so precise, so calculated, that it stripped Elias of his rank and sent him into a suicide mission masked as duty. Aurelian stared at the document, unearthed from a sealed archive, trembling hands tracing the forged signature. The uncle hadn't just betrayed a brother, he'd eliminated a rival. And the family had rewarded him with the throne. What price does power demand? In this case, one man's life, another's silence, and the erasure of truth for nearly 3 decades. The system hadn't failed Elias. Family had. And as the evidence surfaced, hidden communiques, intercepted orders, names redacted in ink but bleeding through under UV light, the Montcairn legacy turned toxic. No longer a tale of honor, but of bloodline betrayal dressed in velvet. The question now wasn't just who killed Elias. It was how many knew and said nothing. They didn't just bury Elias, they erased him. The Montcairn family, terrified that one man's love could poison their legacy of purity, rewrote history in ash and silence. They paid officials to forge a death notice, claiming Elias died a noble hero in battle. But the truth, he died abandoned, sent to a doomed mission by his own blood. Then they burned everything: photos, letters, medals, anything that bore his name or face. The fireplace in the East Wing glowed for 3 nights straight. Servants whispered about the flames that didn't warm, only consumed. And when it was done, the family held a quiet vote: Elias would never be spoken of again. His name was stricken from the family registry, his portrait removed, his existence recast as a shameful ghost. Aurelian stood in the vault where the remaining ashes were locked in a steel box, labeled only E. This was not grief. It was fear dressed as tradition. And what terrified them wasn't Elias, it was the truth he represented. That love, when inconvenient, was more dangerous to legacy than war. But truth doesn't stay buried, it waits. And now, it burns hotter than ever. "We thought we buried him," whispered one elder of the Montcairn clan, voice cracked with decades of denial. "But it's us who've been buried beneath layers of silence, pride, and rot." The admission hit like a thunderclap through the ancestral halls. For years, they'd worn medals, hosted galas, spoken of legacy and valor, all while their foundation rested on a lie. Elias hadn't vanished, he had been vanished. And in erasing his truth, they'd erased their own. Generations grew up idolizing a story crafted from fear, not fact. Now, confronted with photos, voice recordings, and the unshakable presence of Aurelian, the House of Montcairn stood exposed. Their legacy wasn't just broken, it had been hollow from the start. And in the echo of that confession, walls seemed to shift. Paintings of forefathers looked more like ghosts. The weight of the lie once seen as armor now felt like chains. What began as a cover-up had mutated into a curse, passed from father to son, each generation more brittle than the last. But this time, truth had a face, a voice, a name, and it was no longer asking for permission to be heard. And just when silence seemed like the only thing left, Aurelian stood up. No more whispers. No more shadows. He wasn't here to avenge a name. He was here to redefine it. As cameras rolled and history cracked open, he faced the legacy that tried to erase him and chose not rage, but reconstruction. Redemption wasn't handed down. It had to be built stone by stone, name by name. And in that moment, beneath the weight of broken portraits and shattered pride, the future didn't whisper. It roared. But justice wasn't just about exposing the lie, it was about building something stronger in its place. Something that could outlive shame. What Aurelian did next wasn't just unexpected, it was unforgettable. Aurelian stepped into the flash storm, his voice steady, his eyes burning with generations of silence. One clip, just 42 seconds long, exploded on TikTok. The disowned heir of a billionaire family demands justice for his father. Within hours, it hit millions. The raw pain in his voice, the way he held up a charred photograph. The silence that followed every sentence. It wasn't just a press statement, it was a reckoning. Comment sections turned into war zones. Some defended legacy, others demanded accountability. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just about Aurelian anymore. This was about every name erased, every story buried, and the world was finally watching. Montcairn cover-up wasn't just trending, it was erupting. Within 24 hours, it climbed to the #1 spot on Twitter. Instagram reels were flooded with breakdowns of the family tree. Podcast hosts dissected the scandal hour by hour, and protesters began gathering outside the Montcairn estate gates, holding signs that read, "Justice for Elias and you can't silence blood." The public wasn't just shocked, they were furious. This wasn't some old money feud. This was systemic erasure. A betrayal hidden under medals, flags, and forged honor. Aurelian had cracked open a vault no one wanted exposed. And now, a new generation was demanding not just apologies, but truth documented, verified, and screamed from the rooftops. The internet had already decided history would no longer be written by the victors, but reclaimed by the forgotten. The Montcairn legacy didn't just crumble, it transformed, in a stunning turn that went viral overnight. Aurelian announced the creation of the Elias Montcairn Scholarship Fund, dedicated to the children of forgotten veterans, the ones history erased, just like his father. Funded entirely by the inheritance he won in court from the very family that tried to erase him. Aurelian didn't just reclaim bloodline, he redirected it. News outlets called it a poetic reversal, while TikTok flooded with clips of young students in tears, holding acceptance letters signed by Aurelian himself. No private jets, no press stunts. Just quiet justice, wrapped in education and dignity. The Montcairn name, once synonymous with silence and shame, now lit up billboards with a new tagline, "We honor what they tried to forget." What began as a scandal ended in a movement, one man turning betrayal into a blueprint for repair. And for the first time, the echo of Elias's name was no longer a ghost, it was a beginning. In the grand hall of the Montcairn estate, where portraits of ancestors loomed over generations in silence, one frame had always been left empty. A deliberate omission, a wound no one dared name. But not anymore. Under the weight of truth and a nation's gaze, that final frame was filled. A black and white photo of Major Elias Montcairn in uniform. Eyes steady, jaw set. The very image of dignity denied. Beneath it, a single engraved plaque read, "Major Elias Montcairn. The forgotten. The remembered." The photo went viral within hours, reposted with captions like, "Justice. 42 years late, and he's home now." Teachers used it in classrooms. Veterans wept in silence. Descendants of those erased in similar ways began to send in their own photos, calling for spaces once reserved for silence to be filled with truth. And in that still frame, Elias was no longer invisible. He was the final piece, the man they tried to bury, now standing watch over the house that once denied him. The past wasn't rewritten, it was faced. And for the first time, History bowed. The final frame fades to black, but the voice remains low, resolute, unforgettable. When a man is buried by silence, it becomes the duty of the living to unearth him with truth. Those words hit like thunder. The screen stays dark for 3 full seconds. No music, no logo. Just silence this time, not as erasure, but as weight. In that stillness, millions watching from their phones, living rooms, and classrooms feel it a reckoning. Comments flood in. I'll never forget this line. My grandfather was buried by silence too. We need to dig deeper always. The quote becomes a rallying cry, printed on posters, graffiti walls, and memorials. It's spoken at protests, whispered at grave sites, and taught in history classes that finally dare to tell the full story. The clip ends, but the message lingers, echoing louder than any headline. This wasn't just a documentary. It was a call to action. Aurelian didn't just reclaim a name. He gave us a mirror. And now, the question isn't whether we'll look, it's whether we'll dare to speak. What if everything you believed about honor, legacy, and family was built on a lie? The truth about Elias Montcairn didn't just rewrite a chapter, it shattered the whole book. But here's the thing. Stories like his don't just exist in history, they're happening right now. In silence, in shadows, in names erased from walls and hearts. If this story moved you, don't let it stop here. Comment below, whose name do you think deserves to be remembered? Save this video, because someone in your life needs to see it. And if you believe the forgotten deserve justice, hit subscribe right now, because together, we don't just tell stories, we unbury the truth.